the interns and Chris. We're headed for a detour. We're gonna have some fun for sure. On the way to our destination, there's gonna be some humiliation. Are you ready for a road trip with the interns and Chris?
All right, everybody, super excited. We're doing another road trip this year like we did last summer. And I got the interns again this year riding along. Kelsey, and this is Ashton. So here's the thing. Let me explain to you guys and the interns what this is all about. So last year, we did this thing called Road Trip where we got different staff members in and we asked them questions and got to know them a little bit, right? So they think that that's what we're doing again, but that's not what's happening. This year what we're gonna do, because we're doing a series called Road Trip Detours, looking at different detours in the Bible, we're gonna take all these staff members, get them in here, and we're gonna take a detour with them. It's gonna be sweet, but here's the catch. The detours that we take them on is gonna deal with their fears. We're gonna make them face their fears. Oh, this is happening! And we're gonna do it all while riding in a 57 Chevy, mint condition, baby, right here! Whoop, whoop.
About this. Listen, I get to torture staff members and not get in trouble for it. It was a blast filming that. And so here's an interesting little note. I'm gonna ask you a question. So that song, the bumper at the very beginning, you know, I have both services, I've had people come and say to me, you know, Keith did a great job on that song. Did you know that that is not Keith Dudley on that song? Yeah. Anybody know who it is? It's me! Yes, Caleb Roop. All those years you said I can't sing. Boom, baby, there it is. You're still struggling with it. And that's not a joke, because that's the other thing. I said that the first hour I told people that, and afterwards I was going, oh, that's funny. That was really Keith, though, wasn't it? No, it really was not Keith. It is 100% me. Go listen to it again, and then think of me, and then you go, oh, yeah, now I hear that terrible sound. Yeah. That's not Keith. No, not even close to Keith. But super excited about it. I won't rehash what we're doing over the series because I've already said it on the video. But we are super excited about looking at these different stories in the Bible that are detours, these turns that take place. And they're both positive and negative situations. So here's where we're going. Let me throw it up here so you can see what every week we're going to try to accomplish. Detours in life remind us that it's not about the destination, but rather it's about our transformation. It's about us being transformed. A lot of times when obstacles and things come in our life, and whether God turns us in a certain direction or whether we just go the wrong direction, what happens is God is ultimately going to use that, whether he did it or whether we did it, hopefully to transform us to make us more like him. So that's what we're going to try to do each week as we look at these different ones. Now, where detours seem to be the most sensible to me in my life right now is the amazing invention of the GPS. Am I the only one who thinks this is listen, the GPS saved my marriage. That's all I'm saying. Single-handedly saved my marriage. And the arguments that we used to have, I don't know if you guys have ever ridden with the opposite sex in a car when you're using paper maps, but that is a bad idea. And it didn't never go well. But GPS saved it. Not only did it save my marriage, but listen, how many times you ride down the road? The technology is amazing. You're riding and it says, oh, we're going to change plans because there's a problem up ahead, and then it sends you on a detour to avoid stuff. Y'all get that? Y'all ever have that? That is amazing. I love those detours. But here's where it all came to play for me. See, I'm a little older than some, and then some of you guys remember the paper maps, but there wasn't just paper maps. Some of y'all remember tick trips or triptychs. Which one are they called? Triptychs, right? I was too poor. We couldn't afford no triptychs. We drew our maps out with with crayons, and that was my map. But TripTix, AAA, I think, did it, right? AAA, and you'd send in where you were going, the destination, and then they would send you this booklet, and you would open it up, turn the pages, and it would have a map for like here to here, here's your map. And then it would say like stop here for food, and here's some gas stations, all this kind of stuff. Pretty amazing, right? And y'all are going, yeah, but my GPS does that. Well, back in the day, it was paper, and they would mail it to you. And so we did this trip, me and Holly, having to use a paper map. We were going to Fort Worth. We had just got married, and we were looking at moving to Fort Worth. And so we were doing this trip out there, and had paper map. It did great, got us to Fort Worth. But I don't know if you've ever been to Dallas-Fort Worth, but it's a metropolis. It's craziness. And so when we got there, the paper map wasn't very helpful anymore. And so I have an internal GPS. How many of you guys have internal GPS? You know your directions, I'll figure it out, right? And so I'm trying to figure it out. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty good. I can usually navigate it, but not in Fort Worth. It was terrible. And I took so many turns and thinking, no, it's gotta, and the next thing you know, I'm in trouble. We were like really, really lost. And I saw a gas station, I pulled over, and this is a true story, I'm not making it up, which is hilarious, because anytime you say this is a true story, I'm not making it up, it means, oh, so you lie often. I see, that makes sense. This one's a true one, some of my stuff not true. This one's completely true. Stop at this gas station, and there's a police officer in the trunk of his car, doing something. And I say, oh, there's a cop, I'll just ask him. So I get out and I say, excuse me, officer. He lifts up out of the trunk, and there's blood running down his arm. So I'm like, oh, it's not good. So I wanted to say, hey, do you need my help? But I didn't really care. I was like, could you tell me how to get to such and such? Honestly, now that I think back, I don't think I ever offered to help him. There was a guy I noticed as the story unfolds, he's laying on the ground next to him, in handcuffs, but I didn't offer to help there either. I'm just like, I'm lost, and, skinny white guy, because I was skinny then, not now. He's like, and I was like, hey, trying to find such and such, could you help me? And he said, look, dude, you are in the wrong place. You're obviously not from here. You need to, listen, laws don't matter. You're not going to get pulled over. You need to do a U-turn and go very fast. Go really fast. Don't stop for anything. If you see a stoplight, go through it. Go through the stoplight. And then there's the interstate about a mile or two down the road. Just get on it and go. Get away from here. Stop and ask somebody else, because I'm not helping you. And so, and that's true. And then, it's that moment, you're talking to him going, oh, okay. And then you lift up and you look at your environment, and then you start realizing, oh, I'm in a really bad place. There was some prostitutes hanging out on the corner. And I noticed I'm the only one wearing shoes. I'm the only one who had shoes. And it was just rough. And so I jump in the car and I get out of there as fast as I can. And so that's a true story. None of that's made up. Now, here's why I say all that. Here's what I learned. We have this thing inside of us that we're trying to figure it out on our own, and we don't trust anybody else to help us to figure it out, right? Those of us that have internal GPSs, it's a pride issue. I know how to get there. I'll figure it out. And see, nowadays, you don't have to worry about it. So, no, the GPS will turn left. We have no problem of listening to some. I like to have the Australian lady on my GPS. Anybody else? I do the Australian lady. She's amazing. And so I'll listen to the Australian on my GPS system, but I won't stop and ask nobody. You know what I'm saying? Like, she tells me to turn. Yes, ma'am, I'm turning right here. And I don't care. I just listen. But back then, I wouldn't listen to anybody. And when you don't listen, here's the thing that's weird. Two things I'll throw out to you. You can either trust yourself, or you can trust somebody that knows the area, who knows how to actually get there. And every time it seems like I tend to go on this route where I'm trusting myself, it doesn't always go well for me. And so you would think at some point you'd start figuring it out. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There's going to be times in your life when obstacles pop up. And so the question at that very moment that you're going to figure out is, what are you going to do when those obstacles pop up? Who do you trust? And it's also now going to reveal what your character is. That's kind of what we're going to expand on today. So if you want to, turn to Genesis chapter 12. In this, we're looking at, the guy's name is Abram at this point. You guys know him as Abraham, which is what his name will become later. Father Abraham had many sons had. That's how you always find out who the church people are. You just start singing a little ditty, Zacchaeus climbed, and everybody starts saying, yeah, you're the weirdos. And so that's Abraham. Before he was that guy, he was Abram, and it's in the Genesis chapter 12, and first book of the Bible. This is before recorded history. This is when there's no Bibles, there's no sermons on Sunday morning, there's no internet stuff, there's no books. I mean, none of that kind of stuff for church people to talk. He's just a guy, and he's got a huge family and all these people that he's responsible for. And he hears a voice, Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. He hears a voice that says, I want you just to get up and to go. So go, and you're going to go to a place that I'll show you. That's what it says. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. They didn't have counseling or medication at that point, so he couldn't stop the voices in his head. And so at some point he says, maybe that voice might actually be God. So here's the stupid thing. He actually did it. I mean, this guy's like over all of these people. He has all of these cattle and stuff, and he has this huge family. And he says, hey, guys, I heard a voice, and it said, just go. Oh, okay. Where are we going? I have no idea. It just said go. I mean, well, which direction? Are we going to go north, south? I don't know, because it didn't say. It just said go, and I'll show you when you get there. And he did it. Now, you think he does it. Now, there's no voice. It doesn't say that God keeps saying, you're doing great. Way to go. It just says he went. And he keeps going. At some point you go, no, I don't know if this is a good idea. I think I want to go back. He just keeps going. And then finally, he gets to the place, and God said, okay, this is the place. This is it. This is where we're going. So that is a very long-winded setup to our story that picks up in Genesis chapter 12, verse 8. So he's here in this place. He trusted God to do it, and here's what happens. From there, he moved. This is after he gets there. He moved to the hill country on the east side of Bethel and pitched his tent. And with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar, important, to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. So the interesting thing about this is, so he trusts God to do this. He trusts this voice in his head. Good news is God shows up and says, this is the place. So it validated it. And he's like, okay. So, and he's so excited because you can imagine he's thinking, I'm hearing voices. I'm listening to the voices. I'm just picking a random direction. Finally, when God speaks again and says, this is the place, it had to have been a huge relief to him. So what he does to remember this moment, this significant moment, he builds an altar. He says, this is where God showed up. This is when God said to do this. And verse 9, and Abram journeyed on, still going toward Negeb. Now there was a famine in the land. So he shows up, and it's crazy. It's a weird twist of events, and it kind of makes me think about us as believers oftentimes. So God speaks, says, I want you to go here. He goes there. He shows up. God shows up. Yes, he builds an altar, and there's a famine. What I've learned about us as believers, especially in the United States, Western culture as a whole, we're the most prosperous people on the planet. If you're in poverty in the United States, you're still in the top 10% of all people on the planet. Did you know that? Because of that, and then because of TV and Hollywood and terrible information that's disseminated, we have this belief system that the only way that God's in it and that God is there is if it's good. So we say, hey, God, I'm going to trust you, and then we show up, and if something bad happens, we go, God must not be in this, because if God was in it, he wouldn't send me somewhere where there was something bad going on. But if you read the Bible, especially pick up in the book of Acts and just start going, all you see is God sending people places and bad things going on. Everywhere. I mean, there's all these issues and the persecution and suffering. There's books like 2 Timothy is all about how to suffer well. Hey, it's going to suck. That's all I'm saying. You're going to follow Jesus. It's going to be horrendous. And here's how you do it well. I think we need to know that. Because listen, would it surprise you if you found a famine in the place where God called you to? Would it shock you? Would you begin to question whether or not you should have been there in the first place? Start saying, hey, maybe I need to backtrack. Because the reality is more often than not, when God shows up and he asks you to do something, it's not always gonna go well, or at least the way you think it is. It's not prosper in the way. Now there's joy, there's peace, there's contentment, there's sometimes excitement in it, and sometimes it is amazing. But we can't just negate things because of that. And here's why. Here's what I've learned. You'll develop, this is the crazy part of it, you'll never develop trust without a test. God's wanting to build inside of you this trust and basically saying, hey, you're not gonna get that if you're never tested. So here he is, he trusted him with the first thing, and then this famine shows up. He says, now I'm gonna see if you'll trust me with the other one. Let me give you one more quote that I think is pretty powerful. This is not original to me. It's a great quote I've heard many times that I think is powerful. A faith that can't be tested can't be trusted. It's through the testing of your faith that you reach the point that it strengthens you, that God will then trust you with more stuff. When you're faithful with a little, God then begins to build in you more and more and more. Now that's just the beginning. I want to set that as our basis for where we're going today. He shows up in this place, faithful to God. God shows up, says this is it. He builds an altar, he worships, and then this famine creeps in. Now the question is, now that the famine's creeped in, what is his response going to be? How's he going to respond to it? Take a look. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt. So his solution is to go to Egypt, to sojourn there, for the famine in the land was severe. So it wasn't just a famine, it was bad, like starvation bad. But what I find interesting thing is, and I remember God says, I want you to go there. He goes to the place, he says, I want you to go to the place that I'll show you. Go there. So he says, okay. He goes there, God shows up and said, this is the place that I showed you. This is it. This is where you're gonna be. He gets there, famine's there, and what does he do? The famine's there, so he says, okay, I'm gonna go down to Egypt. Famine shows up. God said go here, and I think I'll go down there now. Now that the famine's here, it's not so good. I grew up in the foothills in North Carolina. So Asheville, Lake Lure, Chimney Rock, that whole area, Hendersonville, y'all know where that is? If you go on this side, the east side, go down that mountain, boom, that's where I was. Rolfton, Rutherfordton, for those that can speak. We just said Rolfton. And so you go to the bottom of that hill, that's where it was. Now, that's important because we were in the mountainous areas, and where we lived, it's called the foothills, and so very mountainous, a lot of hills, a lot of curves. And we'd go up to Lake Lure, Chimney Rock a lot. Lake Lure had a little lake, had a beach on the lake, nice place to take your kids. Mom and Dad like to take us to that lake, right? But here's the problem. My parents are deaf. I know that doesn't mean anything. So what? Let's put it together now. I live in the mountains, foothills of North Carolina. We go to the lake a lot with my deaf parents. My deaf parents use their hands for two different things. They use it to drive a car and to communicate. It's bad enough on a straight road to not be holding on to the wheel, but you can imagine in the mountains when you're doing this right here. And they feel like, they've been deaf for a long time. They're like, I think I got this figured out. So they doing it, using their legs, whatever, their teeth. I don't need my mouth, so I might as well just do that right there. All the way up the mountain, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it was terrifying. Me and my brothers and my sister have a great prayer life, thanks to my parents. Journeying up to Lake Lure, we're like, Lord, just get us there. I don't care if we get back, but I wanna go to the lake and go swimming for a little while. Can you at least let us go swim for a little bit before you total the car? And here's what I learned through that environment. So, I'm not kidding when I say this. It was terrifying. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm a control freak because of that. As soon as I could drive, if somebody's like, hey, I'll drive. No, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna do this. I got this one. I have suffered for 16 years, and now I have a license, and I'm driving the car. And so I drove all the time. It took me, seriously, every time I drove anywhere, anytime for about 15, 20 years. And it took me about that long. I was probably 30, 35 before I started letting other people drive when I was in the car with them. I'm dead serious. I was a control freak. And now I'm over that. I mean, I don't let Holly drive, my wife, but that would be stupid. But I let everybody else. That's probably not going to go well, is it? Fortunately, she's not in here, and if we could just keep that part a secret amongst ourselves, I'd certainly appreciate it very much. So that's what we did. And so I became a control freak because anytime a circumstance was weird like that, that's what I would do. So Abram's the same thing. When he hit rough roads, he did what was natural. His instinct was, here I am, I've got all of this family and all these people who are dependent upon me. Here's a famine, it's a pretty bad situation. His instinct was, I'll take control, and then he goes down to Egypt. That's his way. I'll go deal with this famine. So 2 things I want you to pick up on, 2 significant things. When we hit our rough roads, when we have a crisis, when we have a trial in our life, something we're struggling with, whatever, there are 2 significant things that you're gonna learn about yourself. Number 1 is who's in control. At the end of the day, who is in control? And what I found is that our tendency, our nature is that we kind of revert back to what we know. In his case, he needs to provide for his family. There's a severe famine in the land. Starvation's a possibility. And in his brain, I can fix it. I can do this. And so he says, I'll take care of it. I'll go down to Egypt and I'll find provisions and I'll make it work. Now, here's what I want you to get out of this. Think with me for just a second. God spoke to him like audibly, because there's no books, there's no Bibles, there's nothing like that. He hears a voice, which is crazy. And then, because he doesn't have all this information, he literally just a guy hanging out, never heard of this God in the way that we understand it and everything. He says, just go. I'll tell you when you get there. Like what strikes me, I don't know. He trusts that voice. Then he shows up and says, yeah, it actually worked. Then immediately there's a crisis, and I'm just thinking, you ever thought about maybe asking the one who got you here? Because maybe the one who got you here will get you there. But no, our tendency is that when we hit that rough patch, our nature is no, I'll take control and I'll do it myself. It reveals who's really in control. Check out what happens in Genesis chapter 12, 11 and following. So when he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarah, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. That, and Chris Rip turns and says, you're a hottie. Listen, babe, you are smoking hot. Smoking hot. And when those Egyptians see you, they're going to say, that's his wife. And they're going to kill me. But they're going to let you live. Say you're my sister, see? You tell them you're my sister, so it'll go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. So here's the second thing that I notice. So the second thing I notice here is he trusts himself, right? So he goes down, and he's going to go to Egypt. Then he gets to Egypt. The second person he trusts is another person, his wife. So now, not only is he trusting in himself, but now he's going to trust his wife. Well, where's God in all this? I mean, still, there's this weird voice, and he followed it, and the voice showed up. But now I'm not going to try all that. I'm going to trust me, and I'm going to trust others, but I'm not going to trust the one who got me there. And so here's what I've learned. If you really want to experience God at another level, right? If you really want to see God-sized things, for example, God speaking and then you going and then he shows up, right? That kind of stuff, crazy stuff. Then you have to trust him always. Listen, we can't receive God-sized provisions when we trust in anything less than the provider. When we keep looking to other things and then we say, oh, I want the same God-sized provision, but I'm going to trust me and I'm going to trust others. God said it doesn't work that way. God-sized provisions come from the provider. And I know what you're saying, because a lot of people say this, say, well, Chris, there's a lot of risk. I mean, he's starving. If he waits on God, they might starve to death, right? That's a fair criticism. But listen, if he goes to Egypt, they might die. There's risk if you stay. There's risk if you go. Listen to me. If there's risk, who would you rather trust with the risk? Or is it going to be about you and what you do? Or are you going to say, no, I'm going to trust the one who got me here? Crisis, I said, reveals 2 things. It reveals who's in control, but it also reveals your true character. So here's the interesting thing. God ultimately is trying to get us to trust him. I mean, listen, I've learned this. I mean, I've not been alive long, but I've been alive long enough to know this. every step of the way, God keeps reminding me of one thing. Do you trust me? Do you trust me with this? Do you trust me with that? Do you trust me? So life is about this whole thing of learning to trust God, learning to trust God with your family, learning to trust God with your career, learning to trust God with where you live and even what you eat and how you spend your money and where you invest it. It's about, okay, do I trust God or do I trust me? That's what it's all about. But not only that, God is also saying, along the way, as you're learning to trust me, it's going to reveal some things about your character. So in this particular situation, he's all new to this, and we learn something about him, who he really trusts, still himself. But in the midst of that, something really bizarre happens. So we're going to read 13 through 16. Take a look. Notice what he says. Say, yeah, you were right. I think we lost it. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with who? With me. Because of you. And that what? My life may be spared for your sake. And notice what happens. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. So he was right. They did think she was a hottie. He knew it. He's like, no, trust me, I can see, we all can see. You are smoking hot. And because he says they're going to kill me because of you, right? So they did. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house, just as he had predicted. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, donkeys, servants, female donkeys, and camels. So it went well with him just as he thought. Hey, look, you say you're my sister, and it'll go well with me, and they won't kill me, right? And sure enough, she was a hottie. They said, hey, he's going to want to see this one. Whoop! She's a 10. They immediately rush her in. It's all good. Yeah, she's smoking hot. Give them whatever they want. And just load them up with stuff. It's going well. But here's the thing. Remember, when I decide to trust myself, it begins to reveal something about me, about my character. Because the focus here is, if you noticed over and over again, so it will go well with me. So that my life will be spared. He's obviously not too worried about her life. So that my life will be spared. The me is the problem. And it always leads to sin. And sin creeps into the picture. And when sin creeps in, there's consequences. And surely you've already picked up on this. I mean, there's an immediate consequence. His wife is going to be with another man. Am I the only one picking up on that? I mean, everything else is crazy, but you're saying, say that you're my sister, knowing that he's going to take her in, and it's clear he took her in as his wife, which means she was with another man. That's not good. That's all I'm saying. Sin leads to immediate consequences. Now his wife's been with somebody else. But then there's also the second thing. It's not just immediate consequences, it's also long-term consequences. So Lot, who you hear over and over in this situation, Lot's in this situation under seeing all that Abram's doing. Later on, Lot's going to go to Sodom and Gomorrah. There's going to be a mob outside. You know what he's going to do? He's going to send his daughter out to the mob. Isaac, later on, Abram's son, goes to, he's also going to go to Egypt, and he's going to do the same thing. He'll say, hey, to his wife, he's going to say, hey, tell him you're my wife so that it'll go well with me. So there's not just immediate consequences. What I find is when the focus is about me and I'm in control and I'm doing things in my way, there's immediate consequences, yes, but there's long-term consequences because what I'm doing passes on to those people that are around me. And here's the sad thing, listen to me. When we keep making bad choices and keep doing things that are about me, the consequences are usually to the people that we love the most. And at some point, there has to be this awakening that happens inside of us. Listen, there's a risk no matter what you do. There's a risk if you trust God. Yes, there's a risk if you trust you. The question is, who are you going to trust the most? Who has the greatest track record? It's like back to me. I mean, I can either keep driving the car and trying to figure it out myself, or I can stop and ask somebody who actually knows. Ask the one who already knows. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says this. It's a great text. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Trust him. He's the one. Listen, it doesn't say easy, but he'll make your path straight. So the end of this story now creeps in. Abram is now in Egypt. Take a look what happens now that his wife and all this has happened. The Lord then afflicted Pharaoh in his house. So once he took her in as his wife, God, at some point, if you know the whole story, there's a much bigger thing going on. The founding of Canaan and all that's going to happen in that land and all that God's going to end up doing over there is going to be, beginning to set the table. So God's not going to let this happen is what I'm trying to say. We're shutting the door down, right? We're going to close the door. God does it. He does it to the house. Great plagues because of what happened. Verse 18, so Pharaoh called Abram and said, dude, what did you do to me? Seriously. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? You lost your mind. Why would you say that she's your sister? You're crazy. So that I took her for my wife. And now, then, here is your wife. Take her and go. And then in verse 20, Pharaoh gave the men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that they had. So here's the thing that happens. I think it's really significant. When we do this detour and we trust ourselves and we're kind of doing things our way and we're now taking control, our character's now in question, a lot of times what will happen is we begin to start recognizing that we messed up. Now, in his particular case, his recognition of messing up is God-driven. Basically, God uses Pharaoh, who's not even a believer or not a follower of God or Yahweh at the time, and uses him to tell Abram that he's an idiot. And listen, I'm just going to tell you, that's just the way it works sometimes. Sometimes you can't notice that you're stupid. It takes somebody else to go, no, dude, seriously, you need some help. You're not smart at all. And that's okay. I know in this culture, we feel very uncomfortable about that, but you need a friend, a real friend, because a real friend is honest. I tell you the truth. You don't need mama when you get ready to try out for American Idol. You need somebody who actually cares about you, right? Who says, no, dude, you're terrible. You do not need to be singing. And you trust that person. Not that your mama wouldn't be honest, but she probably won't. My kids, I'm very honest. No, dude, that's stupid. Right, Caleb? Like I'm the true father. I'm like, I got you back, son. I got you. He's right over there, if you're wondering. Just want him to know. So what I'm trying to say is there's a course correction that sometimes will happen. If you want to change courses, once you're in the middle of the mess, whether you recognize it or somebody then points it out to you, two critical pieces. Number one, recognition. You need to recognize what's going on. It doesn't matter if it was somebody telling you, and what I mean by that, when I say recognizing, you got to recognize that you got off track, and the same way you got off track is the way you're going to get back on track. He said, listen to me, this is good. He says, me, my, me and my. That's his big words. So it'll go well with me. The same thing that got you there, me, is the same thing that will get you out. Me, my, and I know that sounds strange, but listen, you taking responsibility, me taking responsibility for the mess that I got into. It'd be so easier to say, listen, if you weren't a hottie, we would have survived this. And as crazy as that sounds, I know a lot of people that do that. They blame somebody else who's innocent in the process for their mess. Or you then blame it on God. God, if there wouldn't have been a famine, I wouldn't be in this situation anyway. And God's saying, if you just would have trusted me, you wouldn't have been in this situation anyway. So at some point, you got to recognize. Now, the question is, there's a lot of us that find ourselves in a situation. He's forced out, so it looks like he's recognized. But how do you know if he's truly owning it? By what the next step is. So here he is doing this, and it seems like maybe he's on it, but it's recognizing. But before I read the second one, let me just say this. Because when I talk about recognition, the word is repentance. This is part of the process. Listen, forgiveness is already done. When we go to God about something and we recognize something, let me just tell you this. I know it's okay to say you're sorry and all that. That's part of you owning it, yes. But you're already forgiven. What we're looking for is for you to make a turn and go a different direction. Take a look. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into Negeb. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, silver, and gold, and he journeyed on from Negeb as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been, and at the beginning between Bethel and Ai. So now he goes back to where he first was, to the place where he had made the altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. He worships him. So here's the thing. How do I know if I'm owning it? Is if I turn around and I go back. Now listen, you can turn. I can make a mistake and make a right turn. I can make a left turn. I could try to power through it and go straight, right? Or I could say stop and turn and go back. Now, why is that significant? What's significant about this is it's what we call reverse course. You're reversing your course and going back to where you were. What he does is he goes back to where he last heard God, where God last showed up. What does that tell you? I recognize, dude, I have blown it. I should not have done this. It was a mistake. I should have trusted God. So he goes back to where God last spoke to him. He worships him there and he waits on the Lord. And that's the course correction that God, listen, it doesn't matter what you've done, where you've been, what mess that you've made of your situation. What God wants to know is, are you going to reverse course and go back to where he last was and trust him? You say, no, but you don't know how bad my situation. God's not interested. You're already forgiven. We waste so much time and so much energy and feeling bad and feeling guilty, and we sit in our mess. Well, it's too late. I'll never be able to do it. And we just keep repeating and then try some other stupid idea. And God says, hey, look, it's cool. Just at whatever point, stop and come back. I'm right here. And that's what God's asking. Will you come back to where I last was? Because I'm right here with you. So in 1997, back in Fort Worth still, we ended up staying, obviously, from that little car ride. We stayed in Fort Worth for 4 years. After 4 years, we're there, and I began to feel like God was saying, hey, I want you to plant a church. And so we're like, wow, okay. And so we started praying about it. We started looking around. Well, God, where would you want us to go? How do we get there? How do we do it? I mean, I ain't got no money. I don't even know how I would do this, right? And so we just keep praying and we keep thinking and we keep reaching out to people. And then we started feeling like it might be in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So we go to Rock Hill and we're looking around. I was like, yeah, I think this is it. I think God's wanting us to plant a church here. So, but anytime God asks you to do something so crazy, let me just tell you how crazy. I'm really young. I have no money. I got 2 kids and 1 on the way. And when I say I have no money, it's not like that's the metaphorical no money. We might have had a couple $1,000s in the bank, maybe. And there was no prospects. I don't know if you've ever seen how church starts work. There's nobody there. So zero money is how much comes from 0 people. I don't know if y'all picked that part up. 0 equals 0. And so we're going to do something stupid. And then we start looking around at houses and stuff and for apartments. That wasn't happening. Apartments, woo. This area was booming back in 97, and apartment rentals were way out of our budget. So now what are we going to do? I know this is going to sound crazy, but the better option was to buy a house. Yes, so we said, we'll buy a house because if you look at the numbers, it's so much cheaper. And it's like, okay, if we buy a really cheap house, we could pay for the mortgage. Now, what you're asking is, that's not possible, Chris. How do you get a loan when you don't make any money? Well, now you see why 2008 happened with the crash of the economy, because I got a loan in 1997, and that led to the entire economy crashing. Well, that one loan. But it was a great example of what happened. So we were given this opportunity to get a loan, and no money, no job. I'm not making any of that up. And so we find this house. It needs a lot of work. Another problem. You're going to start finding, I'm a loser. You're going to start picking up on this really quick. I can't fix things. I don't know how to fix things. Like rooms were messed up and things need to be done and knew this and knew that. But it's what we could afford. And I'm like, well, it looks like I'm going to have to figure this stuff out. And I hope I make some friends fast. And so I'm really nervous about it because I don't know how I'm going to do it. Plus, I'm trying to start a church. How do you start a church and remodel a house and all that stuff? And we were waiting at the realtor's office to go look at the house. My father-in-law's late. 1997, you probably remember. Cell phones are brand new. Poor people didn't have cell phones. We didn't have it. Her dad didn't have it. So we weren't communicating. He's just late. We're just waiting. And the phone rings in the realtor's office. He answers it, and it's from another couple who we had looked at their house. It was for sale by owner, really wanted it, perfect condition, but we said we'd never be able to afford it. Had a huge building in the back that we could keep stuff for the church plant, perfect rooms. He remodeled the house. I mean, there literally nothing needed to be done. Just move in, start living, and start planting a church. And we didn't know how much. Same asking price. So that was the first big thing. It's like, had he shown up on time, we would have left. We would never would have got it. I would have been doing this other house, and God protected us from that. But more than that was, then not only did we end up buying that house, they became the first family that was a part of the church plant that we did. So it became like a huge moment for us that God showed up. Because I'm going to tell you, there's tremendous amount of doubts. You know, you start doubting everything about yourself. How could I ever do that? Who would ever show up to nothing to hear me? And, it's like, it's just the stupidest thing ever. And then when that moment you say, okay, God showed up in a mighty way. He must be up to something, so I'm going to trust him. Fast forward a year and a half later. And even in that whole time period, just trying to get a church started and all of that, constantly wanting to give up, wanting to quit, you just keep looking back to that moment. That became my altar. I just kept looking back to that moment. A year and a half later, we're going through a pretty tough time in the church. We were running about 90 to 100 people, and just something weird happened, and we lost like 40, 50, 60 people. We got down. I remember it was after the holidays as well, which was terrible. We had 3 snow weeks in a row. It was a really weird situation. And we showed back up. There's like 30 or 40 people there. And I just all of the air went out of it. And so for the next month or so, I'm just moping around. I'm stupid. What did I ever get myself into? I mean, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done this. And I remember I was preaching in the middle of the sermon and just this realization. And God said, when are you going to let this thing go? When are you going to let it go? You keep holding on to it. When are you going to trust me? See, my problem was I was looking at everybody else that were planting churches. I was reading all these books, and I was trying to mimic them and, trying to do a normal church. I'm in Rock Hill. You don't do normal in Rock Hill. And I'm trying to be normal and preach with weird outlines and all this stuff like they were and try to structure it like them. And back then, purpose-driven church, if you remember some of that weirdness back in those days. And God just says, I called you to plant a church, not these other guys. And so that's when the day I just said, okay, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to do it. I remember in the middle of that sermon, literally in the middle of the sermon, God hit me with it. I said, hey, guys, we're going to quit doing it this way. We're going to make a change. And I got down and I repented. And I turned, and for the next little bit, began to say, okay, God, how do you want to do it? And, of course, God ended up blessing it, and it was a pretty amazing ride for the next 14 years. So I say all that to say this to you today, is that God is not like picking certain, we think, oh, Abraham's special and all this. God still speaks to us, and he's still pointing us. It's different for every person. He's not going to necessarily ask you to plant a church, but he might. He's going to ask you little things like, I want you to take that job. And you're going, yeah, but it doesn't pay as much. Yeah, but I want you to take that job. And then you trust him, and then when he shows up, you go, that's why. And then you mark that moment, and it becomes an altar. I want you to marry that person. You go, awesome, I'm going to marry that person. And that's just an amazing person. It's an altar the day you get married. You trust God with different things. Maybe it's a decision about where you're going to live, or it's a decision on how you're going to use your finances. But each time of the way, as God begins to speak to you and tell you to do something, start a new ministry. I had somebody tell me after the last service that it was weird that I even preached this message today because God told her to start a prayer ministry. And so God just spoke to her and says, it's weird that you brought this up today because I guess I need to be obedient, follow him. And I'm like, yes. And when you do, and when he shows up, build an altar there and never forget it. And I know that in this room, there are some of you, you're in different circumstances. Some of you already have altars from your past. And so that's why I gave you a rock. So everybody, I think most people got a rock. You may not have got a rock. If not, grab one on the way out. And if there's not any, go out into the yard out there and pick up one. Because we may have run out. I don't know. But you can grab a rock. They're everywhere now. They're in the dirt, out in the grass. Just go grab your rock. And that's the reason, literally, I mean, back in the day, they would build altars with rocks. They would find, Now, they would do weird shapes and stuff with them so that when they would leave, they would know when they got back, oh, there's where God showed up over there at that place. So that's why I gave it to you, to serve as a symbol. And what I want you to do is some of you have already had an experience where God showed up. You have a moment that you need to mark, and you can put a date or you could put a word or whatever that represents that to remind you, and let that, put it somewhere that anytime you begin to doubt or you begin to have questions or you begin to doubt where God is calling you next, go back to that moment. That's your leaving Egypt and going back to the place where God last spoke. Some of you are saying, I've never had that moment. Okay, you ready for this? This is gonna be crazy. Ready? I'm asking you today to take that rock and it becomes your future altar. And you claim it. And you go to God, you say, God, I'm gonna trust you. And this is pretty significant. I'm gonna trust that you're gonna show up. Your word seems consistent. So I'm asking you to show me what's next. And when God tells you to do something, here's the critical part. You be faithful and do it. You trust him. You do it and watch what happens. Because when he shows up, now you got your rock. You can date it, put a word on it, whatever, to help you to remember when God showed up. And some of us today, it might be salvation. You said, like, this is still new to me. I don't know who Jesus is. I've never fully embraced him. That could be your first altar, is embracing Jesus and who he is and inviting him into your life. But one of those steps is what I'm saying. Where are you at? What step do you need to take? So I want to pray over you as we close. I want you to be thinking about this. So over the next couple of weeks, I want you to be thinking about it. Up the front as well, we have communion that we're going to do after the service. Feel free to come up and participate in that. It's his body, his blood, especially as it connects to what we're saying. As you're thinking about what God, all this other stuff is contingent upon what Jesus did on the cross. The reason that we no longer have a me mentality is when he died and you said, okay, you're Lord, from that point forward, you're embracing him and it's no longer me, it's him. So it starts there. As you take it today, take it serious, but maybe today you couple it with your request. Hey, God, I'm trusting you, your body, your blood. I'm giving you my life. God, would you do something? And ask whatever it is that you're asking him of. And maybe that today is one of your next steps. Let me pray for you. Father, in the name of Christ in this room, there are so many of us in here. Lord, some of us who have had tremendous experiences where you have shown up in a mighty way. And we use those moments to go back to when we struggle. And God, I'm so thankful, that Lord, that you've given me multiple altars in my life. I don't even think I would be here today. My doubt has been great. So God, I pray that for the people here today, that Lord, those who have never experienced you pointing and them trusting and you showing up, God, maybe today that's it. God, would you speak in a mighty way to them? And God, for those of us that have never embraced you as our Lord and Savior, maybe today, God, that's what we do. So God, as we leave this place, God, may we trust you and may you refine our character. And we pray this in the name of Christ. Amen and amen.